Hi, we are students with ECPI University, Dr. Hitt's class, Nursing 561, with our research proposal. As a group tonight, we're going to cover several things. I'm going to start with our research question. Our research question is whether or not burnout or burnout syndrome decreases with 8-hour shifts, or conversely, does burnout syndrome increase with 12-hour shifts? We're concerned about burnout as a problem for nurses today, and we are seeking to find if this is a question that we can add light to. Our study is quantitative. We're going to hit the PICO questions as follows. Population. I think this is going to be touched on again, but quickly is going to cover ICU, med-surg, ED, ICU nurses. We're hoping for around 2,000 in our population. The implementation, we're going to be using, which also will be touched on as well, Likert scale study of our own tool that we devised specific for this quantitative study. It will be electronic, several components of that. We're also going to be comparative. Our comparative analysis will concern 8-hour shifts to 12-hour shifts, and the respondents will give us data that is specific to whether their burnout is greater or lesser with those corresponding shifts. And lastly, our outcome, again, we want to know our basic research question with our outcome. Is burnout syndrome or burnout for nurses decreased by 8-hour shifts, or conversely, is it increased with 12-hour shifts? Going from here will be Viola to help us with the next part of our questions.
So I will be covering the sample. The samples will be oncology nurses, emergency department nurses, critical care nurses, and med-surg nurses. Now we will go to Serena for the sampling method.
For the sampling method, I broke it down to two possibles. The stratified random sampling, which involves 2 or more groups based on the demographic attributes such as age or gender, or purposive sampling, which is where the researcher handpicks their population based on the knowledge that the population knows about what the researcher is researching. Next, we'll go on to data collection.
Dominique.
So I'll discuss data collection, and we're going to do that by a questionnaire, electronic questionnaire that we're going to give the participants, and it's going to go over some demographic data such as the specialty of the nurses, years of experience, what they see as pros and cons of working their particular shift, and it's also going to include an area of written-in area where they can also give some handwritten notes versus just answering just questions. And so now I will pass it to Sakina for statistical data.
So for our statistical analysis of the data we retrieve, we will use an ANOVA. So the ANOVA will tell us if there is a correlation between nurses' perception of burnout and 8-hour shifts, and we also will do an ANOVA to see if there's a correlation between the nurses' perception of burnout and 12-hour shifts. Once we find out if there is a correlation, we will use a linear regression to see if 8-hour shifts are a good predictor of a nurse's decreased sense of nurse burnout. And is there anything?
Our instrumentation. So Christy and I will be talking about the instruments that we're going to be using. We are, as we've already alluded, are going to actually create our own instrument to evaluate how these nurses are perceiving working the 12 and the 8-hour shifts. We do look to, by creating our own tool and evaluating and researching, there isn't a tool that creates our theoretical framework of Orem self-care deficit to relate it to nurse burnout. And so by creating this tool, and Christy's going to talk more about that, we're hoping to actually get some outliers that would otherwise be missed. And looking at the self-care, we will also be evaluating some of the self-care requisites that are noted by Orem, such as we do believe and are proposing by working the longer shifts typically nurses barely have time to take a break, have a sufficient intake of water or food. A lot of times nurses skip meals. Also, looking at provision of care associated with elimination processes and excrement. So we really don't always go to the bathroom, especially on a 12-hour shift, and looking at that impact as it relates to nurse burnout. And then looking at different tools, we will, in creating our own tool, use some of the elements that have already been validated, such as the MBIGS tool, which was a tool created by Maslach and Jackson that actually measures burnout, and as stated earlier, has been a validated tool that's been used across different occupations and used in different countries. And then I will pass it to Christina, who will talk more about why we decided to create our own tool.
As we wanted to delve into the specifics of why nurses are burning out as opposed to 8 and 12-hour shifts, respectively, we designed our own tool on a Likert scale, most likely, pretty much all Likert, with some fill-in-the-blank boxes for nurses to be able to input some subjective data, of course. But our own tool was necessary because we wanted to cross all gender lines, all cultural, ethnic lines, age of nurses. We wanted to ensure that all was representative and that the maximum amount of data was possible with this one tool. As this tool is implemented, of course, I think it's already been said, it will be electronic and it's a voluntary, so that no one is pushed into doing anything. But we expect a small amount of attrition with any data collection, and we're hoping for 2,000, of course. Now, this concludes tonight's
One more thing, sorry, I don't think it was said that we have a ratio level of measurement. Mm-hmm. It's a scale level of measurement for our data collection survey tool.
Well said, Sakina. So this supports our quantitative study with the data that we collect. Does anybody have anything else that they would like to interject at this time?
Nope.
All right, ladies, this concludes our Google On-Air Hangout for Nursing 561 for Dr. Hitt.
Thanks for listening.